All right. Hi, everyone. So the theorist that I researched was John Dewey. And I just want to start with a quote from John Dewey, just to kind of give you like a sneak peek as to what he's all about. So he said, give the pupils something to do, not something to learn. And the doing is of such a nature as to demand thinking. Learning naturally results. So just a little overview of John Dewey. It is said that John Dewey may be one of the most influential philosophers to impact education. He is famous for his role in progressive education. He is well known for both his philosophical and his educational theories. And his philosophies were guided by his beliefs about democracy, community, and problem solving. John Dewey was born in 1859 in Burlington, Vermont. His family was very active in both the social and democratic political community, and these experiences with his family helped to shape who he became as an educator and a philosopher. He strongly believed that groups of people needed to come together in a peaceful manner to solve problems. And kind of along those same lines, he also firmly believed that people have a responsibility to make the world a better place. He believed that this needed to be done through both education and social reform. So, a little bit about John Dewey's education. At 15, he attended the University of Vermont, and he graduated from there at 19 in 1879. He then went on to teach high school for a few years, and then he attended graduate school at Johns Hopkins University in 1882. There he studied philosophy, logic, history of philosophy, and physiological and experimental psychology. And his graduate studies launched his philosophical career. So Johns Hopkins University is where he really got into philosophy and what launched the rest of his life, essentially. So his career in 1894, Dewey became the head of the philosophy department at the University of Chicago. And while he was there, he founded the laboratory school. And this gave him a place to test his psychological and educational theories. In 1904, Dewey left Chicago. He moved to New York City to work in the philosophy department at Columbia University. He stayed there until 1930 when he retired. During his career, Dewey developed his own psychological theories. He reconstructed components of human conduct, things like instincts, habits, emotions, and conscious thought. And this work helped him to inform his future statements on experience, which I'll talk about in a little bit. It also helped him to assert his ideas that the mind is really a social and interactive thing, and it's made through our environment. So this contradicted the traditional thought that the mind is very isolated and subjective. Some of his accomplishments. Dewey spoke out on many public issues, including freedom, human freedom, economy, race, women's suffrage, war, and educational methods. His thoughts and speeches were always infused with the lessons that he learned in philosophy. This is just kind of a little fun fact that I thought was interesting. So when Dewey was in Chicago, he was socially active there, and he befriended Jane Addams, who of course is the founder of the Hull House. And he actually credits Jane Addams with helping him to develop his views on democracy, education, and philosophy. So I just think that's interesting to think about, like, where would John Dewey be? Where would he have ended up if he had never met Jane Addams? John Dewey also, throughout his career, led, supported, or founded a number of organizations, and these included the American Civil Liberties Union, the American Association of University Professors, the American Philosophical Association, the American Psychological Association, and the New School for Social Research. He was a busy guy. And Dewey was also actively involved in education for his entire life. He taught high school and college. He helped to plan and implement curriculum. He established and administered schools and departments of education. He lectured internationally. And he also wrote on many different aspects of education. So now on to his philosophy and his educational theory. So Dewey's thoughts on education stem from his philosophy of pragmatism. This philosophy states that reality is something that's to be experienced. Reality must be experienced. Humans learn best from a hands-on approach, and this philosophy was crucial and central to the progressive movement in education that he became a part of. Dewey worked to connect child, school, and society. To him, education meant incorporating unique individuals into a society that would eventually be their society. This is why he believed that who the child was on an individual scale mattered so much. Dewey believed that children had a better education if they took an active part in their own learning. Because of Dewey's philosophy of pragmatism, meaning reality must be experienced, he strongly believed that humans learn by doing, and that this needed to be implemented in classrooms. Dewey believed that children learn best when they are able to link present content that is presented to them to past experiences and knowledge. This was a groundbreaking idea at the time. Traditionally, education was completely content-based, curriculum-based, and children were basically empty vessels to be filled with the curriculum. Education was not about the process of learning or the experience of it. It was, about doing right, getting the right answers, pass or fail, and that was kind of it. But Dewey had a democratic view of the classroom. He argued that because democracy isn't just political and civic, it also consists of crucial habits in problem solving, compassion, creative expression, and civic self-governance. And schools were a critical place for students to learn this and experiment with democracy. And one quote that kind of shows his views on democracy: democracy is not an alternative to other principles of associated life, but the idea of community life itself. So that really shows how strongly he felt about democracy, and not just in the political sense, but in the social sense as well. So a little bit of a closer look into his theory and philosophy. Dewey insisted that students should be active participants in the classroom, not passive. The traditional view of the classroom was that, students should sit in rows, memorize, and recite. And Dewey was strongly opposed to this. He argued that student interest and not fear of the teacher or fear of the system should motivate them. Students should cooperate and not compete. Dewey's theory also meant that schools needed to become like small communities, micro communities that reflected students' interests and needs. Because of this educational change that Dewey was implementing, the role of the teacher needed to change. He believed that teachers are not to only act as instructors, which is what the traditional view was, that, the teacher stood at the front of the class, gave the instruction, it was up to the students whether they passed or failed. That was education. But teachers should also become facilitators and guides, seen as coaches, to give students opportunities to discover for themselves and become active and independent learners. Oh, and then one quote I forgot is that if we teach today's students as we taught yesterday's, we rob them of tomorrow. So that really just shows his progressive view of education. All right, so classroom management and implementation. So as we just discussed, the role of the teacher, I'm going to move myself out of the way. There we go. The role of the teacher has changed over the years since Dewey's philosophy and theory has been implemented across the country. Teachers are in the classroom to guide and promote student engagement. Teachers are responsible to provide instruction and curriculum that is relevant and engaging for students. We've talked about this a lot in our classes, how important this is. And I do think that this is the norm in most classrooms today. I did read while I was doing my research some arguments that Common Core curriculum has kind of taken some of Dewey's philosophy and theory away and out of the classroom, because it seems, I guess in some schools, seems to be backtracking a little bit to the more traditional classroom before Dewey came along, where it was just about the curriculum, the test grades, the exams, the studying, and not really about the experience and the hands-on learning. So that was an argument I found regarding Common Core curriculum. But a way to continue Dewey's educational philosophy and theory, one thing I found was utilizing technology. So technology, as we know, is a great way to promote student engagement. Instruction can be designed to meet the needs of the individual students, which is, one thing that Dewey talked a lot about, was meeting the needs of the students. And we can do that through technology. Students can experience learning in a way that is current and relevant to their lives. It provides them a sense of choice and motivation to be engaged in their own learning, which, Dewey was all about, like I mentioned, giving students a sense of independence in their learning and education and not just being talked at. And 21st century these days, technology is a big way to do that. So there are many ways teachers can use Dewey's philosophy of pragmatism and the theory of democratic education. Teachers can build relationships with each student and encourage relationships between the students, create a community feel, like was mentioned before. He felt strongly that schools and classrooms should be almost like a micro community. And teachers should utilize student interest and give them choice in their learning. And all of this, like I said, aligns to Dewey's theory and his beliefs on education. So I just have one final quote from Dewey that I think sums up his thoughts on what school and the classroom should be. He said in 1897, "I believe that the school is primarily a social institution. Education being a social process, the school is simply that form of community life in which all those agencies are concentrated that will be most effective in bringing the child to share in the inherited resources of the race and to use his own powers for social ends." So Dewey really emphasized the community atmosphere of the classroom and the hands-on experience that students need to learn. So just a final thought that I have, there's my references. A final thought that I have is that, though Dewey passed in 1952 and he was working on his philosophy and theory, in the early 1900s, late 1800s, the effects of his philosophy, theory, and writings can still be felt in classrooms today. His ideas of learning through experience, social interaction, and democracy have had lasting effects. And what was once thought of as progressive education, that Dewey was a part of, I think we can now call it modern education. I think his ideas have really stuck in the classroom and in the education system, that students need to experience learning hands-on in order to be successful learners and become successful members in society. So, thank you.